This woman does, I say this for a lot of people, but trust me, this woman does some of the best stories ever, some of the strongest stories ever, always willing to, as I talk about, go out on that ledge and just expose herself, to say this is what it is, this is the honesty. And we love that here. A sterling storyteller, Miss Libby Halevi.
Thank you, Beverly. Oops! No, don't start the timing yet. What did I do? I just wanted to move it. Sit, stay. Okay, now you start the timing. I recently got back from 5 totally unplugged days in Sequoia National Forest. No cell phone, no computer, no email. Yes, it is possible. Every year around Memorial Day, but never on the holiday, I like to get away from the noise of my life, decompress, center myself, and contemplate whatever comes up. So I threw my backpacking gear in the trunk of my car, along with a cooler filled with food and a seat cushion for my love seat to sleep on. 5 hours of driving, 8.5 gallons of gas away, one way, 6,000 feet elevation, and voila! My dog Bree and I arrived in nature as nature intended. The park was really empty, just the way I like it. I really craved the isolation. I drove past the unstaffed entry kiosk that had a sign, "Please pay on the way out." Can you imagine that working in Los Angeles? And drove into the National Forest area near General Grant, the second tallest tree in the world. I like a particular unimproved campsite. It has a fire ring, a picnic table with no seats, no running water, not even pit toilets. And I headed for it, only to discover something that people in Southern California rarely think about: snow. They'd had 234 inches this year. That's 19.5 feet. And my desired campground waited 3.5 miles behind an unpaved road with a road closed gate in front of it, made redundant by an uninterrupted snow field 3 to 8 feet deep. Oops. The light was fading, so I erected my tent just below the snow line, right next to the sign of a tent with a red diagonal line through it. I figured that they'd have to boot me out in the morning because no way was I leaving that night. Checking the time, I discovered that my watch battery had gone dead. Was that perfect or what? I grabbed a quick uncooked bite to eat and cuddled with my dog under my monster -5-degree sleeping bag. I slept I don't know how long until my regular insomnia kicked in and claimed me. Bundled up in down and polar tech, I emerged from my tent to stare at a miraculous sky. In the city, we forget how many stars there are. I sometimes think the main purpose of pollution is to hide us from this visible infinity. My ears, so used to defending themselves against the background roar of even my quiet neighborhood, my ears hurt as they encountered the profound silence. I was literally miles away from any other human being. The loudest noise I heard was my resting heartbeat. The stars began to fade as light rose from behind a gentle hill. Moonrise? No, dawn. Its light unimpeded by pollution and reflecting off the snow like Klieg lights at a Hollywood premiere. I'd forgotten how bright the sun could be. I returned to bed, snuggled with the dog, and slept until I could sleep no more. Next morning, over a breakfast of French roast coffee and fresh mango eaten in the middle of a snowfield, I laughed heartily as my 8-year-old Bree frolicked like a puppy, chasing snowballs, tossing a chewed-up rag of a stuffed toy in the air, catching it, shaking it, throwing it down, and pouncing on it, then running with it with her joy palpable. My major pastime? Watching the snow line recede. Sometimes writing, always thinking. Drivers came through and immediately left, their plans thwarted by the snow as mine had been. I retained my solitude. That night, a more gentle insomnia visited me. As I emerged from my tent, I found myself in the middle of a cloud bank, ephemeral wisps of air and water moving with the slow, stately majesty of giant, ancient cloud people, like Middle Eastern potentates, like magi. As these cloud beings passed over, around, and through me, I sang Van Morrison's Moon Dance at the top of my lungs and danced with the elements as the dog ran ecstatic zigzags through the snow. The next day provided more of the same: peace, quiet, snowmelt, cars that came and left. But that evening, a car pulled up and stayed. Its driver, an odd-looking young man, shaggy hair, squared-off beard, walked around the area like a stalking ghost, then made a sandwich and settled in to read and sleep in the back of his car. I kept to my tent and resented his presence. Hey, this was my no-camping space. He was camping. Still, he proved quiet and unobtrusive, obviously in this remote area for the same reason I was. Sometime in the middle of the night, headlights interrupted my sleep. 2 cars pulled up and disgorged what sounded like full loads of noisy young men who'd had more than a nodding acquaintance with alcohol. As they stomped through the snowfield, Bree huffed her barks at a dramatic genetic recall of her purpose of her species. But I said nothing. I did not want to reveal my gender. My adrenal glands had already fired. Was I in danger? Were these rowdy boys going to make sport with the loner in the tent? Then I realized, for all the intruders could tell, this tent could have held a 300-pound Bubba with a shotgun and a Rottweiler. Still, I felt sudden gratitude for the strange yet respectful young man sharing the turnout with me. The intruders ran out of steam and left after about an hour. As they drove off, I gave thanks for my survival and eventually fell back asleep. That morning, the understaffed Park Service finally caught up with me. A friendly rangeress told me I could not stay where I was, then gave me directions to another remote, unimproved location. After packing up and fumbling around the back roads for a bit, I located the isolated bluff top, an overspill area from a neighboring campground. Getting out of the car, I saw red-tailed hawk, hummingbird, pine cones fresh from the snowmelt and not yet ravaged by hungry squirrels. No people, no noise, no traffic. The music in my head shifted to Dave Bruson's Mountain Dance, and that night I sang, danced, drummed, prayed, and made a great big campfire on my first try. The trunk light from my car guided my steps between the fire ring and my tent. Bree chased invisible critters, and once I coaxed her into howling. She has a beautiful howl. That night I slept straight through, no insomnia. Next morning I wanted to know what time it was, so I turned on the car to read my clock. In the car, dead battery. The light in the trunk must have drained it. In asking for directions the previous day, I'd learned that they expected more snow, so there I was in the literal middle of nowhere. Storm on the way, no snow tires or chains, dead battery, and who knew if people would even be driving on that road once the weather got bad. Time to be an adult. Even though it was a day earlier than I planned, I dismantled the site, packed up the car, and walked to the side of the road. 15 minutes later, I flagged down a woman with an infant in the back of her minivan. She didn't have jumper cables, but said she'd try to find someone to help me. About 20 minutes later, she returned, reported she'd found some people who'd come by when they finished their rest stop. She left and returned once more, leading their SUV to me. Then she, Katrina was her name, drove off with a wave, my back road angel. The crew of 4, 20-somethings from nearby Visalia, happily gave me a jump start and I drove off, leaving behind my business card like a silver bullet and letting them know if at any time they wanted coaching advice on starting an online business, they had only to email me for support. And somebody did, and I lost the email. Please get back to me. Heavy snow flurries driven sideways by the wind stuck and accumulated on my windshield as I pulled into the entry kiosk to pay for my pass. I bought a year. For 17 gallons of gas, 3 gallons of water, a 3-pack of ice, and 5 hours of driving in each direction, I can go to Sequoia anytime I like until May 31st, 2011. On the way down the mountain back to my life, the snow turned to rain and then evaporated completely as I drove through the sunny flats. At a little fruit stand, I turned off my engine next to a sign that promised fresh cherries, just picked this morning. I bought a quart, rinsed them, and returned to the car. The engine started promptly, and as I pulled away, I popped a cherry, the first cherry of the season, into my mouth. A cherry purportedly picked just that morning. It lived up to its billing.